love talking about money. I love talking about retirement. I love talking about, how to build wealth and what are the best ways in order to do that. And I think retirement is such a big deal and it's very important, but yet a lot of us kind of just push it down the line for so many years thinking the retirement is really far away when really it's not. So Sarah, welcome to the talk today. Thank you so much for being here. And I can't wait to really dig into all the questions that we've curated here today.
Thank you, Massiel, for having me. I'm very excited about this topic. We talk about this day in, day out with clients. So very excited to start tackling some of these questions.
Yes, awesome. So for all of you on the call, how this is kind of going to go, we've curated a few questions that we think are just really important topics. We hear from a lot of people. We've also crowdsourced from when we put it on LinkedIn or on Instagram, and we had people send in questions. And so we selected the top, most relevant and that I think are, really going to hit the mark on everything that you came here today to listen to. And then we will open up a Q&A where you can type into the chat any questions that you have. And then towards the end of the webinar, we'll address each one of them and have Sarah help us answer it. Okay, so let's get into it, Sarah. I think the first thing that we need to talk about before we really get into the bulk of this call is really talking about 401k. And I know that everybody knows what a 401k is to some degree. We hear about it a lot. We know sometimes our companies do matching with it. But, I'm somebody myself that I have to admit, I know I have a 401k, but for the longest time, if you were to ask me where to find it, how much I had in it, and how much my employer was matching, I couldn't answer those questions because honestly, I was just going through life thinking that I knew that I had one, but not really paying attention to it. So please, help us break it down for those who may be like myself, who just don't know much about the 401k. What is it? Why is it so important, especially talking about retirement?
Yeah, you're exactly right. Most people that we're working with have 401ks. It's a great company-sponsored retirement savings account. And so you'll be given a login typically when you join a company, whether it's a number of months before you can start contributing, but something that you need to be checking regularly, logging in, making sure your contributions are up to date, making sure you're getting the full company match. So really when we're working with clients or people asking questions about 401ks, we want to make sure that we understand the company benefits fully, because if you're not taking advantage of the full company match, we're missing out on free dollars, which are exactly what help propel you to retirement even more quickly. But the 401k in general, you can contribute pre-tax, Roth. Some employers will let you contribute after tax. And all of these are great vehicles to continue to add to your retirement fund so that you can get to financial independence even more quickly.
Yeah, we heard from one of our guests about their 401k and how the fact that they never got the company match, even though she spent 30 years at that company for the first 10. And only when she kind of started to look into financial independence and realize how much she had missed out by not paying attention to it. And she actually calculated and told us it was hundreds of thousands of dollars that were missed over compounding over 10 years. So I really like they brought that importance to really make sure and check it out and talk to a wealth, company, wealth management company to really help you out and figure out what to do with that. One thing on 401ks is there's a lot of rules and, it can get I think that's why a lot of us just don't look into it because it just seems a little complicated. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the rules on withdrawing money from a 401k, including penalties and age restrictions.
Yeah, so people might be familiar with the most common numbers surrounding distributions from 401ks, which is 59.5. Most people think that that's the only time or the first time that you can really access your 401k without a penalty. There are other ways that you can access it. For example, if you are getting severed or you are just ready to retire early, you're 55 and you decide to leave that company, you can access your 401k early without penalty via the rule of 55. So adequately named because you've already attained the age, but that allows you to access those funds early. You can also take funds out for first-time home purchase, etc. But really when we're talking about age, retirement, and when we should be withdrawing from that account, I typically don't recommend that we touch that before we have to or before we retire, because there are typically other buckets of funds that we like to make sure that we're utilizing, because the 401k is such a valuable source in terms of getting that company match, getting that time value of money growing and compounding on a tax-deferred basis.
Got it. Another topic that really comes out a lot when you talk about 401ks are Roth IRAs and IRAs in general. Another two things that I'm not super familiar with, and I probably should be, but I'm sure I'm not the only one. So can you please tell us the difference between, a Roth IRA and traditional IRAs and how they can be used?
Yeah, you are definitely not the only one who's either not utilizing them or doesn't understand what they can do with them. I would say the majority of people who come to meet with us are high income earners. They're in the oil and gas industry. And because they're high income earners, they don't think that they might be able to take advantage of these accounts. And so, starting with my favorite account, the Roth, it's tax free and it's a great legacy account too. So, the funds grow tax free. You can withdraw from it tax free in retirement. And then you can even pass it on to your children and they can make those withdrawals tax-free. So that's something that we like to utilize with almost all of our clients because it's such a great addition to the 401k funds that you're adding. This is another bucket of retirement funds that just gives you diversity and breadth of where you can pull funds from in retirement. Now, if we talk about the IRA, I love this too, but it's a little bit different. So you can either contribute pre-tax or you can contribute after tax. That'll depend on how much income you have and what you qualify for. But for high income earners, like most people that you're talking to, that we're talking to, they need that IRA to utilize what's called the Backdoor Roth. And so in order to contribute directly to their Roth IRA, they have to go through what's called the Backdoor through their IRA first. So these two accounts play a huge part into being able to effectively utilize tax strategies in high income.
Got it. So when you mentioned that you could transfer some of these to your children, let's say that we transfer it over and they're under 18 or under 65. What is the age limit or how does that work for if you do receive it as a child, how can you take that money?
Yeah, and to make sure I'm understanding your question, this is for inherited Roth IRAs.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Great question. So a lot of times if children are under the age of 18, we're going to have worked with somebody to set up a trust or other vehicle for those funds to be inherited just because there's children or minors. But if you're over that age and you're inheriting those funds, you have 10 years based on the new rules to take those out. And those funds will be tax-free, which means you're not impacting their tax bracket. You're not causing them tax implications. Unlike if you were to transfer over a 401k or an IRA to them, they still have to take the funds out, but they're fully taxable. So you could be causing them more tax problems.
Are there any specific limits on how much you can contribute to either a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA per year?
Yes. So it depends on your age. If you're under 50, it's $7,000 per year. If you're over 50, it's $8,000 per year. Now this will change year by year depending on the inflation factor that the IRS adds. And when we're looking back at the last few years, that's happened on a pretty regular basis. So pretty much tripped over my tongue, get to keep contributing more each and every year. And these contribution limits sound pretty low, but if you're starting early, like the first time you have a job, even if you're in high school and you've got earned income, you're working at, using a personal example, an ice cream shop, and you've got income coming in, you can start making those contributions early. And because the growth on that Roth is tax-free, you get huge compounding benefits to where the money is working for you and you're having to focus less on really getting money in later on when you're closer to retirement because you've already done the hard work up front.
Got it. Yeah, the beauty of compounding.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Those limits that you mentioned is just by age and not by how much income you bring in, correct?
Those limits, you're correct, are by age limit, but if we're thinking about when you can contribute to which type of account, you're right, kind of bringing back to that question we get from people all the time who are high income earners. I can't contribute directly to a Roth. You're exactly right. There are income limits to putting money directly into that account, which is why if you've got high income, we'll go that backdoor route so that anyone of any income level can make that contribution.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the magic question that everybody always wants to know is, what is the percentage of your income that should go towards retirement savings? And I know people break it down into savings and, the fund money and, house. And so for retirement, what are we looking at for a percentage of your income?
That's a question that we also get a lot. I will have to say that it depends. It depends on your unique situation. It depends on what's important to you now and in retirement. And it also depends on what you're choosing to spend your money on now and what your goals are for spending in retirement. But What we typically like to do is make sure that you've at least got a 3 to 6 month cash reserve bucket set up. And then we really focus on that retirement savings, what's left over after income and expenses each and every year. So we'll focus on making sure that we're getting that employer match in the 401k. If we've got extra cash flow, then maybe we bump that up as you're getting salary increases, as you're getting bonuses, as you're progressing in your career. And then we just keep stepping that up each time that we're able to, whether it's fully maxing out the 401k, doing that backdoor Roth, maybe maxing out your HSA. I know typically people don't think about that as a retirement account, but it can be. And just making sure that we're doing it in step so that you're not sacrificing the life that you want to live now because all you're focusing on is retirement.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So what steps or exercise would you give someone that's starting to think about retirement? And honestly, I feel like more younger and younger people are starting to think about retirement, which is nice. I would think the older generations maybe like, I've got 30 years to work somewhere and then I'll think about retirement. But we've seen a lot of movements nowadays where more people, I think, are just like wanting to learn about money at a younger age and really setting themselves up. So, what are some steps that maybe somebody in their mid 30s or, mid-career can really start to plan out for that retirement?
Yeah, that's a timely question. I just was talking with a client yesterday who is in their mid 30s. So they just started a family. They are in the prime of their career. They've had some career advancement and they're really thinking about and focusing on what can I do now so that I can retire early. And really what that does is it brings us back to the drawing board where we're looking at what's coming in terms of income, what's going out the door, what does retirement look like for them? And then really backing into, okay, what are the steps that we need to do to get there so that you can accomplish X, Y, Z? And just like you said, the earlier you start, the easier it's going to be. A lot of people who come to work with us who are closer to retirement, start thinking about it maybe 5 or 10 years before, and they'll work with us and then talk to us 3 months after starting and say, oh, I wish I had started earlier. So really the moral of the story is the earlier you can get started and really make sure that you understand what your financial picture looks like, the better.
Got it. And so would you say some of the questions to start thinking of is like, what do you want to see yourself do in retirement? How much do you want to withdraw per month? Do you want to be on many vacations? Do you want to work maybe some little hobbies where you bring in income? Like, what are some things to think about when you're thinking the big picture of retirement?
Yeah, and that's kind of the most fun question that I get to ask clients is what does it look like for them? And you're exactly right. Sometimes it's they're traveling. Sometimes it's they want to move next to their grandkids and see them every single day. I have a client who bought a hostel in Costa Rica, sight unseen, and they're living their best life there on the beach every single day. So when we really think about that piece, it's going more into the personal piece rather than the financial piece and getting an understanding for how they think about money, how they were raised with money, what they want to spend on. And when we get an idea of what's important to them, then we can create that plan. But then you also have to think about things that are unexpected. So when we're creating that plan, we have to think about how we can create flexibility in the plan for things that come up. Maybe you want to help your kids buy their first home, or maybe you've got a health event that comes up. So making sure that that plan works to achieve those goals in pretty much every circumstance.
Got it. So usually when we think about retirement and you kind of work through this exercise, would you say you kind of start from where you want to be and what kind of income you're collecting from that retirement fund and kind of work backwards to say how much you need to be saving today and give it 10, 20, 30 years?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty much where we start from because the goal is kind of the ultimate end all be all. So we're going to be working backwards from there. And really once we understand that goal, then we can get into the nitty-gritty of what do we have to save each and every year so that we can accomplish that. And so we'll be collecting tons of different details about what's coming in, what's going out, and really looking at the unique situation along the way because people's lives change. So it's not a static plan. It's one that has to kind of ebb and flow with whether it's career progression, severances, birth of kids, death, everything like that. So just really keeping the plan very agile.
Got it. So we actually have a great question from the chat. And so it says, how do I make sure my spouse and family is financially secure if something happens to me? So along those ways of we think it's going to be great when we get here, but there's so many things that can happen along the way.
Yeah. To make sure that they are financially secure if something happens to you, most people that we're working with, you probably have to company-sponsored life insurance. So that's something that we always look at, one, because it's typically fairly inexpensive and or provided free from your employer. So we're looking at, if something happened to you tomorrow, what would the rest of your family need in order to support themselves? That helps us back into a number of what kind of life insurance we might need. You can also get an outside term policy so that it's cheap. It's going to expire at a certain point because there's going to be a time in your life when you're financially independent and retired. And you probably don't need that because if something happened to you, it would be very tragic, but your family would still be financially sound because you had gotten to the point where you did not need to work anymore.
Got it. Okay, that's very helpful. We have another good question from the chat. So if you guys have questions, we're going to go to the chat, but also to the curated one. So feel free to throw more questions. We want to hear from you who are, live today with us. So how much buffer should I plan for when saving for retirement?
I think that really has a lot to do with people personally and how they feel about money. I've got a few clients who have dealt with family members getting really sick and they've had to deal with long-term care or trying to get money out of long-term care policies. And so with that, we really plan with them on, can you self-insure for things like long-term care? Do you need a policy like that? There are other things in terms of people being nervous about the market. So how much do we need in a cash reserve versus how much do we need in fixed income so that the rest of their account can be working in the market, growing, compounding, more inflation protected. So I think it's hard to pinpoint an exact number of buffer, and it's really going to be a person by person, how they feel about money, how they feel about retirement, and what kind of flexibility they want.
Yeah, I totally get that. And that's very, it's really unique to each individual because a buffer for one person may be like too much and for the other one be like no. And I think that kind of goes in the same of like safety funds. Some people are like 1 year, 6 months, 3 months. Like it's so different for everyone, and it's really like how you feel about money that's really going to determine that for you.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Back to the curated questions that we got from Instagram. What are other retirement plans besides 401k and IRAs that I can use? Because I think 401k and IRAs are like the ones that we know about that are very like marketed, but is there any other things that we should be looking at?
Yeah, there are other retirement accounts. If you're at companies, you're going to get that 401k. There are other types if you're self-employed. Probably not going to apply to most of the people that we work with, but if you retire and you start your own company, maybe you have a solo 401k or a SEP IRA or some kind of defined pension plan that you're starting for yourself. But one of the other things that I like to consider as a retirement plan that oil and gas companies offer is the pension plan. And you're not directly contributing, but it's a huge retirement asset. And it's a function of how long you've been there, what your income is. So while you don't directly increase that account by loyalty to the company, by progressing in your career, you're really growing and compounding that pension, which in itself is kind of a retirement asset. And if you take it like an annuity, it kind of acts like fixed income as well.
Got it. No, that's very well explained. Now, my least favorite thing are taxes, and I think everybody on this call agrees. So how do taxes change when you retire, and do they work in your favor or against you? Because obviously if you've retired, you're not bringing in that kind of income. So, how does that work? Can you like walk us through that?
Yeah. And I think whether they work in your favor or against you really depends on whether you've done the pre-planning and whether you're doing the continuous planning year in, year out, so that you can make sure that the tax tail doesn't wag the dog. When we're thinking about it, your income is up here when you're working. Typically, there's a pretty dramatic drop the first couple of years of retirement. And so how do we take advantage of that? Instead of sitting and enjoying the fact that we're paying very little tax, it's really nice to do that. But if we're not utilizing that time to do tax efficient planning like Roth conversions or utilizing the 0% capital gains tax bracket, then it really is not working in your favor because If we're not pre-planning each and every year for what our taxes look like, then you're exactly right. It won't work in your favor and you'll pay more taxes over your lifetime than you need to.
Got it. Okay. So it's all about planning and making sure that you're taking into consideration all of the different liaisons within the tax world and
Yes.
making it work for you. There's a lot of things you could probably do to make it work for you.
Exactly.
Got it. Okay. We've got another question from the chat, and it says, at what age should I start Social Security, and how does that fit with my other income streams?
That's a great question. I don't know your personal financial situation, so I'll make it more general. We talk with a lot of our clients about when they should start Social Security. Full retirement age is 67. And one of the things that we'll look at with them as they're approaching that age is what does their health look like? Really focusing on longevity, how long you'll be able to take that income stream. And then we'll look at what's going on in Social Security at that point in time. One of the things that we'll also be looking at is, do you already have an annuity stream from a pension or something like that? And how will taking Social Security early impact your total income, which could then preclude you from doing as many tax efficient strategies, like we just talked about, the Roth conversion, things like that. So there's so many different variables that we'll look at to come to giving you advice on what might make the most financial sense for you. But it's not always finances that are the ultimate end all be all for the decision. It's also a personal choice too. So if you really don't want to delay it, that's something that we talk with clients about. But if you do delay it till 70, you get an 8% credit each and every year. So there's definitely a benefit, but I'll have to say it depends again because everyone is so unique in terms of income streams, how they feel about it, and where they are health-wise at that point in time.
Got it. And I think that's why it's important to get, a wealth management company where you could really go one-on-one because it's so dependent. You got to see the whole picture in order to really give that advice. Yeah, yes. I get that. So we have another good question in the chat, and she says, how do you stress test your retirement plan against inflation and market downturns?
That's a great question. I really like utilizing Monte Carlo because you get to see thousands of situations where the market is either outperforming, underperforming, or average. So you can see how your portfolio performs over, full market cycles. When we're looking at our cash flow projections, we're just forecasting one return, and we like to use very conservative returns because if we're fully invested, I want to make sure if I'm telling you that you can retire, that even if we've got just an average or kind of marginal market from here on out, that I never have to go back to you and say, you've got to go back to work. But really what we're looking at in terms of protecting against inflation, equities have historically been the only thing to be able to keep up or beat inflation. So making sure that you are invested in the market, making sure that you are keeping invested and sticking with a strategy, because if we're trying to be more tactical, pulling out of the market or trying to get back in at the right time, we're losing some of that inflation protection. We're actually leaning into the downturns where we're taking losses and kind of keeping those on the books. So just making sure you're sticking to a strategy, keeping invested, and then being, realistic with the plan in terms of returns so that in case we do have a downturn, your portfolio is going to be okay as long as you've got, cash set aside to weather that time.
That's really a really good answer. And I kind of think about, I think when you talk about retirement, it's not like a one-time set plan. It's like constantly reiterating, maybe looking at different approaches every year as life is changing, you kind of like go back to the drawing board.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
It is definitely not a set it and forget it.
Yeah, you got to constantly be revisiting. Okay, so how do these accounts that, we've been saving up for 30, 40 years, you've been putting money aside for a 1K, Roth, how does that actually come into play when you retire? What does that look like? Can you break it down for us? So this money is in these buckets, and then how do they start paying us when we retire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we talk about it in terms of buckets too. I'll draw up on our whiteboard for our clients. We've got our pre-tax funds, like our 401k. We've got that Roth tax-free bucket. And then we've got brokerage account dollars and our cash dollars that are invested in the market. Maybe you've got company stock payouts, things like that in that type of account. But when we're thinking about accessing those funds, we have to make a plan before we start just pulling funds so that, like we talked about, we can be tax efficient, but we can also pull from the right buckets first, knowing then what comes later in retirement, like required minimum distributions. So we focus with a client on what their withdrawal strategy looks like, what they need to pull out each and every year to make sure that they're accomplishing that retirement plan that they had. So that usually looks like a cash reserve of 1 to 2 years worth of expenses in a high yield savings account. That then looks like replenishing that cash reserve every so often when we've got a good market from their brokerage account. But one of the great things about that cash reserve is it can act like a paycheck replication for our clients. So we can send money out to them every month, twice a month, and that really helps when you're flipping that switch from accumulation to decumulation, because it's hard to start pulling from those accounts because you've worked so hard to keep growing them. And then when you start pulling from them, it's a very difficult mindset shift. So if we can send those out on a regular basis, people know that they're empowered to spend from them because it's their money.
Oh, that's awesome. Can you tell us, some interesting stories? And I think that's like where I'm excited about is people who've worked so hard their entire lives and they finally get to that retirement. What are some fun stories that you've heard? You mentioned the Costa Rica, they bought a hostel and they're living their best life. What other stories have you heard maybe from your own clients or other clients, from other, people who work with you? What are some cool stuff people are doing in retirement?
Yeah, I've got some clients who have bought a villa in Italy and they've moved there pretty much permanently, which is very exciting, something I want to live vicariously through. I've got other clients who sold their home and now they live in an RV and travel the US, all over the world. And then I've got other clients who just really focus on charitable giving, and they didn't know going into retirement how much that might look like. And so when we talked about the fact that she could do a qualifying charitable distribution due to her age, basically pulling out of her IRA to directly donate to a charity, when we told her she could do her entire required minimum distribution to charity each and every year, I think that was probably one of the most powerful things that I have seen, just because it was everything that she had wanted to do and she was able to accomplish that in retirement. And that's not moving to another country, that's really doing something that's at the core of what she believes.
That's awesome. What would you say is the average nowadays, maybe within your own clientele, that people are retiring? Are people still retiring within that 65-year mark, or do you think it's getting younger and younger? Just your own personal thoughts.
For me, it seems to be getting a little bit younger. I would say the majority of the people I'm working with were retiring closer to 60. That might have to do with the fact that some oil and gas companies have pensions that allow you to start early if you get a certain number of points. But then we're also seeing that severances in the oil and gas industry are letting people retire earlier with more money in the bank, so they reach financial independence a little bit earlier. So I think our niche market is maybe a little bit different than the typical bucket of retirees. But yes, people seem to be retiring earlier and earlier, which is great because there's so much that they get to do afterwards.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Okay, so we have another question from the chat, and it says, how do you suggest splitting contributions between retirement accounts? So 401k, IRA, Roth IRA, and taxable investments.
Yeah, another really great question. We want to make sure that you're at least getting your company match from your 401k first. Depending on your income bracket, that's going to either be pre-tax or Roth. But really, when we're thinking about adding in the IRA or the Roth, your brokerage dollars, the first two that we want to have locked down are your 3 to 6 months of expenses in cash, getting your company match, and then from there, that's when we add things on. So to your question, we'll continue adding contributions to that 401k until we get maxed out. Then we get to the next bucket where we can start doing more. So maybe that's adding a few $100s to your brokerage account every couple months so that you can make sure you're diversifying your buckets. When you get comfortable with that, maybe you get another bonus. Maybe that means we can do the $7,000 backdoor Roth each and every year. So it's really about layering those pieces on rather than splitting everything all at once, because I think it's really important to make sure that you're touching all of those buckets, but maxing those out as you're getting to those points.
Got it. Yeah, that's a good way to split it, or think about splitting it. So we have another question from from the chat, and it says, should I diversify more outside of oil-related investments? Because obviously a lot of our community is oil and gas, so they're probably, asking for that reason.
That is a very personal question. So it's going to differ for each person, but most of the people that we talk to, if they want to keep oil and gas stock, they've been with that company forever. It has sentimental value. So there is a benefit into keeping some of that. But on the flip side, typically what I'm recommending is that we're looking to make sure we don't have concentration risk. So if you have 10% of your portfolio in an oil and gas stock, we need to look at tax efficient ways to think about continuing to diversify. Because if you're still working there, you're probably still going to get grants. You might still be doing stock purchase, things like that. So you've got more coming in. So from my perspective, we want to make sure it's as diversified as possible. And even if it's not in a single company oil and gas stock, maybe it's an oil and gas ETF if you really believe that that's an industry that's going to do well in the future. But I think diversification is going to be your friend over time rather than betting on one thing to do well.
Got it. That actually made me think about, usually I remember when I looked at the different kind of retirement, like aggressive or not aggressive, or risk or not risk adverse, when you kind of work that little thing that we all look at online. How does that work in terms of like you're more risk adverse when you're younger, and then as you get older, you start kind of tightening up on the risk management of like the stock portfolio, et cetera? Can you kind of break that down for us? Or like what's recommended?
And I think this is also a personal thing too. I think the rhetoric is that most people hear is that as you get closer to retirement, you need to get more and more conservative. And that's not necessarily true. You're exactly right, though. When people are first starting out, they've got a long investment horizon, which means they can weather a lot of different market cycles while they're contributing to these accounts. So even if there's volatility, it's okay. And volatility is actually going to help their account if they're, let's say, aggressive in 100% equities during that time period. As you're getting closer to retirement, maybe we add that 1 to 2 years worth of cash reserve so that it's there and ready. Maybe we add a little bit of fixed income, but it really depends on what financial independence looks like for you, what your spending is going to look like, because at a certain level, you can afford to be very aggressive if you want to just keep growing and compounding your accounts as you're getting close to retirement and even in retirement. But a lot of people will also have that portfolio level where if they're nervous about the markets or they want to focus more on capital preservation, they can afford to be really conservative too, because they have the asset base where they don't need to grow and compound that portfolio at an aggressive rate anymore. So it does depend, but typically you'll want at least some funds set aside in retirement that are a little bit more conservative.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. And a question that I personally had was, when I'm looking at the 401k or the Roth, the money that I'm putting in there, you can then select what you want to put that money into, right? So whether it's stocks, crypto, international, can you like break down like what does your money do under one of those three? Or where can you put it?
In terms of investments in the 401k?
Yeah.
Okay. So typically your company is going to have a predetermined list of what you can invest in your 401k. I don't know that I've seen crypto yet, but I've also seen oil and gas stock inside the 401k too. So there's typically quite a few options. You'll have equities in terms of large cap, which think of your S&P companies. You'll have mid and small cap, which are smaller capitalization. You'll also then have international. And you're looking at the entire globe. You've probably seen this year internationals have done exceptionally well. So while the last number of years, maybe even a decade, internationals have not performed like we would have wanted. And people asked us all the time last year why we were even bothering having it as part of the portfolio. It really just drives home when you have that list of investments in your 401k, you want to make sure that you're not just selecting one investment. You want to make sure that you are spreading out your investments in a diversified manner so that you're making sure that there's something in your portfolio that's working at all times. I mentioned equities are the only thing historically to keep up with inflation. So maybe you've got, if you're aggressive, maybe 2/3 of your portfolio in US split up between large, small, and mid cap. Maybe you've got 1/3 of the portfolio in international. if you're dabbling in fixed income because you're a little bit more risk averse or you're closer to retirement and want more capital preservation, kind of just looking into how that plays into your portfolio. It's not a one size fits all, and people all have their own opinions on how to invest and what's the best way to invest. So there's never a one size fits all for that.
Got it. But I think what I learned from this is that you do so much. It's not just like one thing. Whenever you put money into 401k, you could really diversify quite a bit inside of that bucket.
Yes. Yes.
Got it. Okay, we have another good question on the chat. It says, is there a percentage of income you should invest every year to help you have enough time for that growth over time?
Yeah, another good question, and one that we get a lot. I wish there was a magic number. One of the things that I like to make sure is that if we've got a really good handle on what our income and expenses are, then we understand that bucket of extra funds that we have. And then based on your unique situation, that's where we can start allocating funds across. I can't say that's 10% or 5% because your income's going to vary pretty widely. Your life situation and expenses are going to vary pretty widely. But as long as you're making sure you're getting that match and taking advantage of everything that you can based on that bucket of extra funds that you have, I think you'll be in really good shape. But I do want to caveat, some people really want to retire very early and put all of their excess income into savings, whether it's a brokerage account or 401k or Roth. But you also have to weigh that with enjoying what you have right now.
Yeah. I can see that happening where you kind of forget to live now and like enjoy this because you want to do well later, but it's kind of that balance of making it last all the way and not like suffer here and then enjoy here. But yeah, I can see that.
Exactly. Life is short, so you might as well enjoy it. And then, yeah, just making sure that you're contributing as early as possible, because that's going to be the biggest marker for what kind of growth you're going to have, because it's a longer time period.
Yeah, it's longer in the market, longer in compounding, longer in everything. So the younger you start,
make it work for you.
Yeah. Okay, there's another great question that I don't know if anybody's ever asked you this, but it says, what is one thing you wish your clients asked you more often? Like maybe what are some questions that you're like, you should be asking this whenever you meet, somebody managing your wealth?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important questions that's a great one to ask is, what else could I be doing? I mean, we're proactively reaching out to clients and recommending things, but this is more from a side of our clients have really saved and they've been focused on that, not really the spending part. So my favorite part is talking with them preemptively about, what could you be spending more on? Like, we've got the problem where maybe we have too much money, or maybe I have some clients who want this to bounce their last check. And I say, well, you've got XYZ going to the kids. If something happens to you tomorrow, buy the first class ticket, travel, or donate money, or whatever it is that's important to you. So I think asking more of what people can do to enjoy either their life right now or retirement in the future, I think that's a big question that might get overlooked because we're focusing so much on the savings piece.
Yeah, I heard a lot about what you just said on sometimes we just focus on the saving piece, and that's not always the best way to really make your money work for itself and kind of do the best you can, because we're just about to just save for a rainy day and then that just becomes the entire thing.
Yes. Experiences mean a lot to clients that I work with, and being able to live through those experiences with them is really great.
Okay, awesome. Well, we have a few more minutes left till the end of the webinar. So if you guys have any other questions, I'll kind of just wait to see if in the chat any of the folks have. Okay, we've got 2 questions. Okay, so how can I make sure that my money lasts if I live longer than average life expectancy? That's a really good question. Yeah.
I think that's all about being realistic when you are looking at your projections. So if you are worried about outliving maybe what current life expectancy is, look at your family history. Do you have a history of longevity in your family? Even if you don't and you're worried about it, maybe that's projecting your cash flow out to 95 or 100. I have a client who wants to live to be 120. So we've got him projected out to there. And we just to make sure that if he keeps spending at that same rate after retirement, he's okay no matter what happens. So I would say just be, realistic in terms of those expectations. And if you want to be extra conservative, that's okay too. But on the flip side, it might also mean that you have to spend your money down more quickly if you find that you're not going to live to 120, or you'll have more to pass on to the kids because you've been a little bit more conservative in your projections.
Wow, I'm still shocked at the 120 years. He really doesn't want to spend his money. It's like,
no, you want to live forever. Yes.
I love that. Okay. Another great question is, how much does someone need to invest in order to work with an advisor typically?
That's going to be on an advisor to advisor basis. We do have minimums here in terms of who we best help. But for anyone who's reaching out for more information, we're more than happy to talk with you and just give some information, regardless of whether or not you're somebody that we typically work with or qualified. It will depend on every single type of advisor. And if we're not the right fit as a fiduciary, we're going to tell you that, and then we're going to give you some guidance on where to find good information or better help.
Good. So regardless whether you guys can work with them or not, you're going to guide them in the right way. And okay, so it's worth reaching out. Good.
It is definitely worth reaching out, and we are, as I mentioned, all over Google with our either webinars, our YouTubes, or our articles, just to go in depth on company benefits and tax efficient planning and financial strategies. So that's also a really great way to get kind of complementary information as well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we have another question, and it says, and this is actually quite interesting actually for a lot of oil and gas folks. Does anything change if you're retiring as an expat? Most people that I know are overseas at some point in their career, and who knows when that time comes, and maybe it could be towards the end of your career. So how does that come into effect if you retire overseas?
Yeah. I've got quite a few clients who do a little bit of both. Either they are retiring and living overseas permanently, or they've been on expat assignment and they're coming back to the US. So as you can imagine, there are going to be some tax items that you'll want to make sure that you cover, whether you're working with our internal tax team or you're hiring to a foreign tax advisor on top of that to make sure that you're taking each of those pieces into account. But you have to understand how things are taxed there, how things are then going to be taxed back in the US if you maintain your citizenship, and then what might be required in terms of filing, especially if you have foreign investments, because the US filing requirements for foreign investments are very strict and very expensive if you get it wrong. So just making sure you have the right guidance, whether it's talking with an attorney, talking with a tax advisor, or talking with us, that's really where we would start so that we could kind of create a team to make sure that we understand exactly where you are and what the rules are around that.
Got it. Okay. Well, this has been super, super valuable. So much knowledge and golden nuggets, honestly, in 45 minutes, which I think is super great. For somebody that, has never talked to an advisor or a wealth management company, I think these kind of webinars are just like an easy way to dip in and kind of see what it's all about. And so I think thank you so much for you and the Willis Johnson Associates team for putting this together. I get to learn a ton, so I'm super happy because I know retirement is around the corner for me. And so thank you so much, Sarah, for your wisdom today. And, everybody knows how to reach out to you guys and, reach out on LinkedIn, or they'll probably get an email, for the people who have joined today or who have registered. So do you have any last comments or any last piece of advice or anything you want to leave the folks with?
I would just say, well, first, thank you for having me. I love nerding out and talking about these topics. It's what I get to talk about every day, so I absolutely love it. But the last piece of advice would really just be save early. And if you want a second set of eyes on something, just to give you comfort, peace of mind so that you can sleep, do it. You can reach out to any advisor, whether it's us or somebody else, but they'll take a look and let you know where you are so that you can start making adjustments if you need to early, because those goals, hopefully your retirement goals, are non-negotiable. So how do we make sure that we change what's going on now so that you can get there?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that. And just to leave one last thing is I think it's important for you to look at the overall picture of where you are with your money, how you feel about it, when you want to retire, etc. Because sometimes we don't know it. We think we're in a certain bucket, or we think we're going to be retiring this way, but you've got to look at the data. You got to look at the numbers. And so I think talking with someone like yourself that's going to break everything down, you could clearly see, you know, where you're at and how you can get there versus just like, oh, I think I'm okay. All right. You know, so I really love that you mentioned that. Thank you so much. I'm going to take that.
People have never seen a lot of people have never seen it laid out. So when you finally show someone what their plan looks like, it's pretty, yeah, they're shocked.
Yeah. So how can somebody find you or anybody at Willis Johnson Associates and maybe want to work with you guys? And after you tell us that, can you kind of run me through the process of like what it looks like from the first time they engage with you, and then, you know, what does that look like?
Yeah. So if you go to wjohnsonassociates.com, you'll find our website. If you've ever Googled anything about your employer benefits, if you're a Shell, Chevron, or BP employee, we've already probably popped up on your Google search. You can also find our company on LinkedIn. You can find me personally on LinkedIn and reach out and schedule a meeting. But to your question on how that works, if somebody reaches out to contact us, what we'll be doing is setting up an initial meeting where we get to know you really well. We gather a lot of data, but we also tell you more about us and how we work with our clients. From that meeting, what we're doing is putting together all of this great data that you've provided to us. And in our second meeting, we're kind of showing you your complementary financial plan. And it's not just seeing your plan, but it's seeing what it would look like to work with somebody like ourselves on an ongoing basis, as well as seeing and quantifying the value that we can add for the fee that we charge. And I think it's important having all of that information to go into that third meeting where you're deciding whether or not to work with us on an ongoing basis.
Got it. And do they have to be in Houston or in Texas, or how does that look like?
It's a great question. The silver lining of COVID is that we have clients all over the world. There's actually some clients that I have not ever met in person. We just work virtually. So I've got clients all over the globe. As you can imagine, you know, we've got expats over there working in oil and gas. And then we've got people all over the country. And then we start working with some people in Houston, and they retire and they say, I can't take the heat anymore. And they move and live somewhere else and maybe come to meet with us in person once a year. So definitely not required to live in Houston.
Awesome. I think that's why I want to retire. It's just I can leave while it's really hot in Houston.
Yes.
It's too hot. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much, and good, great afternoon for everybody. And thank you so much for joining the call today. We'll see you on the next webinar, which is coming soon. So stay tuned for more details on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.